Wings Over the Alamo is made possible by Lockheed Martin. And the City of San Antonio, the San Antonio Convention and Visitors Bureau, Film SA, the San Antonio Airport System, and Port San Antonio, the United States Air Force, Air Education and Training Command, Boeing, and Pratt & Whitney.
In Texas, the country is open, distance is great, and the sky rules. We sing about the sky, paint it, photograph it, cuss it, but we never ever take our eyes off it. So when a new technology captivated the world in the early 1900s, San Antonio, the largest and most important Texas city at that time, sat up and took notice. Why? Because there was something new in the Texas sky, the airplane. In February, people flocked to see Louis Poulin make the city's first flight. That same month, an Army lieutenant stepped off the train in San Antonio.
One of the most colorful characters, I think, in the history of the military in San Antonio would be a little guy named Benjamin Falloy.
He had started to fly with the Wright Brothers and then started working with the Wright Brothers at Fort Myer when they were trying to sell their airplane to the Army. They liked him because he seemed so enthusiastic and interested in their aeroplane. Incidentally, that's what they called it in those days.
In March 1910, Lieutenant Falloy arrived in San Antonio with 7 enlisted men, 1 civilian, 11 crates, and orders from Brigadier General James Alley.
I was called into General Allen's office in Washington, and he officially told me to take airplane number 1 to Fort Sam Houston. It was then he gave me his famous order to take plenty of spare parts and teach yourself to fly.
While flying at Fort Myers, the new Army flyers wrecked the aircraft. It was repaired and prepared for shipping by Wilbur Wright.
Before he left, Mr. Wright told me to write to him if I had any questions about the airplane or flying, and he would do his best to answer them.
On March 2nd, the plane and the man were ready. The sky was bright and clear with a breeze from the southwest. Falloy took off.
I couldn't discern it above the noise of my engine, but reporters said a reverent hush fell over the crowd. This was appropriate, for I was praying. My first flight of a government-owned plane took an eternity, lasting just 7.5 minutes. Soaring above soldiers, tents, horses, I discovered my natural element, the sky.
Technology is what drives urban development, and this was the newest technology around the whole world, and the idea of capturing that technology and making it work for the city's economy. A couple of local businessmen, William Tuttle and Luther Clegg, at the time they were really trying very hard to make that occur.
Mr. Tuttle recognized early that there was really a future in aviation. And my granddad and Mr. Tuttle, he recognized that if we could get airplane factories to locate in San Antonio, that'd be a really great benefit for the city.
They managed to get the city newspaper on board. There was a wonderful editorial in 1910 that announced we were the aeronautical center of the world, which I thought was really rather ambitious since we had probably 1 biplane in town at the time.
They didn't get the community to be excited about trying to attract airplane factories. So Mr. Tuttle and Mr. Clegg decided that they would court the military.
The difficulty with that, of course, is we go back to the riskiness of the technology.
The major problem that Folloy encountered was that every landing was a controlled crash. So he would look at his airplane, he would write a letter to the Wright brothers and say, this has happened or that has happened, what should I do to repair it?
I was the first and only pilot to learn to fly by mail. The Wrights' advice on several occasions probably saved my life, and the airplane as well.
After his eventful first flight, Folloy continued to fly, continued to crash, and continued to correspond with Wilbur Wright.
My dear Mr. Wright, I have been intending to write you for some time to get your views on conditions relative to the operation of the machine down here in Texas. In all my flights...
Dear Lieutenant, I am a little puzzled to account for the lack of lift which you
I have enclosed herewith a set of questions.
I send a rough sketch so you can try it on your machine.
I want to be absolutely certain I thoroughly understand.
It is also possible that the rear horizontal plane has too much negative angle.
The difference in the control was a revelation to me. Very sincerely, B.D. Folloy, 1st Lieutenant Signal Corps.
Your ideas are very sensible on the matter of machines for the Army and well within the bounds of what it is possible to do and do well. With best regards, yours truly, Wilbur Wright.
When Benny was ordered to Fort Sam, he was given an appropriation of $150 to buy equipment and to buy spare parts and linen and wood and wire for his airplane. But the $150 went pretty fast because he had so many crashes. Almost every landing was a crash. And finally, he had to put his own money, and he put almost $350 of his own money into parts and pieces and wood and wire and linen.
These personal expenditures, plus much midnight requisitioning in the plumbing, carpentry, paint, blacksmith, and tailor shops at Fort Sam, enabled me to carry on a reasonable amount of self-instruction and fairly steady program of service, testing, and modifications.
The airplane had skids. It didn't have wheels in the beginning. And naturally, when he would land, that sudden stop would almost pitch him out of the airplane. So he went to the saddle shop and asked to have a belt made. So that became the first seat belt. Because of that sudden stop on these skids, he wondered if it could use wheels. It solved that problem of not having to stop so suddenly when he would come in for a landing.
The Wright airplane became a familiar sight in the San Antonio sky. In April 1911, a new Wright Flyer B and a Curtiss airplane arrived along with 3 new pilots, Lieutenant Paul W. Beck, Lieutenant John C. Walker, and Lieutenant George E. M. Kelly. On May 10, 1911, Lieutenant Kelly took off in the Curtiss for his qualification flight.
George Kelly crashed his airplane not too far from a line of tents, and Lieutenant Kelly was killed in the process, unfortunately, and became, I think, the first military pilot. There had been other fatalities, of course, flying, but he was the first military pilot to die while flying a military plane.
The Fort Sam commander, General William Carter, had had enough of this troublesome airplane. He ordered the aviators to leave. Lieutenant Folloy was reassigned to a desk job in Washington, D.C.
It was a bitter experience, but I had learned to love the smell of airplanes, the blast of wind in my face, and the exhilaration that only flying can give a man.
Aviation was gone from Fort Sam, but it was not gone from San Antonio. Soon after Folloy left, the Stinsons arrived.
Catherine, Margie, Eddie, and Jack. And they got interested in aviation really through Catherine, and so she got interested in flying. And she ran into quite a bit of difficulty because she was a woman. And so she eventually found a flight instructor named Max Lill, who took her, and she became the 4th licensed woman pilot in the United States. In about 1913, Max came down to Fort Sam in San Antonio and was instructing and suggested that Catherine come with him.
Texas in general produces good flying weather. We don't have that many days of rain, don't have many days of cloud coverage, which is very conducive to pilot training and beginning to the beginnings of learning aviation.
Good flying weather was a boon for the Stinsons. Catherine performed in air shows and instructed local pilots while working out of Falloy's old hangar at Fort Sam. Marjorie and Jack went to Dayton, Ohio to be trained by the Wright Brothers. Eddie, an ace mechanic and aircraft builder, also became an ace pilot. But like Falloy, after 2 years, the Stinsons had to leave Fort Sam.
So Catherine and Margie and Eddie had to look for a new place to fly. And Eddie, as the story goes, went up and found a place which is currently Stinson, and Marjorie went to City Council and petitioned them to lease her the land. And that's where they built their airport at the time and started their Stinson School of Flying.
Finally, it was decided early in about 1915 or so, decided that the Air Corps really need to return to San Antonio. But Lieutenant Falloy, now a captain, returned to San Antonio, I suppose, victorious.
This time, Falloy did not come on the train. He flew. He led the 1st Aero Squadron's 6 planes in their first cross-country flight. These 6 military planes joined 4 planes owned by the Stinsons to give San Antonio a total of 10 resident aircraft.
Among the first assignments given to Falloy and his 1st Aero Squadron was to fly down to assist in the pursuit of Pancho Villa, to fly over the border to go down and try to find Pancho Villa. They did try valiantly. The planes did not have the power to get over the mountain peaks, plus the fact that Pancho Villa was one smart cookie and he was able to avoid all these guys who were looking for him. So the 1st Aero Squadron was suddenly reduced in a matter of months to 0 airplanes. Falloy was forced to return to San Antonio by train.
While the United States Army was chasing Pancho Villa, war was raging in Europe.
In about 1915 or 1916, of course, most of the aviation centered around Stinson Field with the 2 sisters that were busy out there training young Canadians how to fly for the Canadian Air Force so that they could go to Europe and fight in World War I.
The war in Europe was starting. An idea was born that we need a powerful force in the air. The French had aircraft, the Italians had military aircraft, the British, United States had 0, but we did have suddenly $13 million to start building an air force.
One of my first tasks was to obtain a suitable flying field, and I could not envision it being anywhere else but in San Antonio.
Captain Falloy selected the site. Mr. Clegg and his Military Affairs Committee assembled the land, and Texas Senator Morris Shepherd secured the appropriation for the new airfield.
And it was without question that the new field was going to bear the name of the first military aviation fatality, Lieutenant Edward Maurice Kelly. So the new field, Kelly Air Force Base, came about in 1917.
Construction was still underway when 4 JN-4 Jennies landed on what had recently been a cotton field. 3 of the pilots were military: Captain Carl Spotts, Captain George Reinberg, Captain Bert Atkinson. The 4th was a civilian, Eddie Stinson. The very next day, April 6, 1917, the United States entered World War I.
Eddie eventually became a civilian flight instructor at Kelly Field at World War I. Catherine applied numerous times to fly for the Army Air Corps, but was routinely turned down because she was a woman. So she did contribute greatly to the war effort. She flew a Red Cross fundraising campaign, which she raised approximately $2 million. And then she eventually volunteered with the Red Cross to become an ambulance driver in France. Eventually, Margie went to work for the U.S. Navy in the War Department.
The young men flocked into Kelly Field. They all wanted to fly.
Well, when they built Kelly Field, it grew quickly and they had to build auxiliary fields, and they built Brooks Field, a mere 6 or 7 miles away.
You had a San Antonio native, Sidney Brooks, who was an aviation cadet. He was landing his airplane and crashed and died, and so they named the new field in southeast portion of San Antonio after him.
The numbers of trainees grew rapidly at Kelly Field, and I think at the end of the war, as I recall, the number was something like 25,000 people were on that field that had not existed just a few years before.
1 year, 7 months, and 5 days after the United States took up arms, the First World War came to an end.
The announcement of the armistice on November 11th of 1918 caused great concern among the flying cadets at Kelly Field. They couldn't believe that the Kaiser had chickened out before they had a chance to go and prove their mettle in the air.
There was a lot of experience in World War I of the potential, not the actual use of them, but the potential use of aircraft. So after World War I, then aviation became a much different thing in the Army.
You had a huge trained body of pilots and mechanics looking to continue that job. So you have the big traditional military drawdown from the military, dropping from 200,000 people in the air service to just under 10,000. And so you have the first barnstormers coming up. There are people being introduced to aviation at county fairs.
One of the most famous of the barnstormers would have to be Charles Augustus Lindbergh.
Charles Lindbergh had already been a barnstormer. He joined the Army to learn how to fly the Army way, and they sent him down to Brooks Field. Well, he flew in his old Jenny, as it were, and the Army, of course, would not let him keep the airplane at Brooks Field, but it was only a few miles away, so they insisted that he board his airplane here at Stinson Field, and that's what he did.
In this very town, you know, the barnstormers put on a heck of a show. People came from miles and miles around for the chance to see the world renowned. The great Charles Lindbergh.
Stinson was a barnstormers airport, so barnstorming was an avenue for aviation to grow.
The civilian people who were using aircraft for all sorts of things, stunts as much as any, the races, transcontinental races and things like that, were developing aircraft that were far superior to anything that the military had. These were aircraft that weren't old fabric-covered biplanes. They were now all metal, all aluminum airplanes, and had much more powerful engines.
In September of 1922, Jimmy Doolittle, perhaps America's most famous military flyer, flew a de Havilland DH-4 transcontinental. In other words, he took off from Florida on the Atlantic coast and flew it completely across the southern United States to California. And he had a full moon to help navigate with. They planned it that way, of course, because there were no nav aids, as they call them, or no radars or air traffic controllers to talk to. And it was a very historic flight. He finished the leg into San Antonio just about sunrise. And there was quite a large crowd of people out to meet him at Kelly Field.
The great Lindbergh, the Lone Eagle himself, his flight across the Atlantic nonstop was the apex, certainly, of the barnstorming era.
For aviation, this time between the two world wars was a time for testing theories and setting records.
Carl Crane and Bill Ocker developed the first instrument procedures on how you would safely fly an airplane when you couldn't see outside. That was done here at Brooks. So you could look at the instruments as you were being rotated, and you would feel one thing, although the instruments were telling you something else. Jimmy Doolittle was able to make the first blind sortie, blind flight, take off, fly around, come back and land. Quite an accomplishment. We don't do that today. Okay? And he did that in 1929, late 1929. He credits Carl Crane and Bill Ocker for the work that was going on here at Brooks. Now instrument training is actually part of basic flight training.
Just as Catherine Stinson had set records before the First World War, now brother Eddie became a major aviation leader.
He was known as the Dean of Aviation. After Eddie left the civil service as a flight instructor at Kelly, he went to Michigan to start an aircraft company. At the time of Eddie's death, back then he was equivalent to today's Chuck Yeager. The Stinsons contributed to aviation in another way by training some of the local San Antonians who went on to become very famous in their own right. Jack Frost learned from Margie. He got a Distinguished Flying Cross in World War I. The Stinsons also taught Edgar Tobin, who went on to become a World War I ace and found his niche in aerial mapping.
Aviation was moving forward rapidly, and its advocates were pushing for recognition by the military.
These people were very vocal. They would say, we simply have to keep this going, and it being air power. The pilots were out there flying around doing things, doing stunts, doing barrel rolls, flying through barns, just to make the public continue to be aware of the power and significance of military air power.
The Air Corps Act of 1926 gave us a tremendous shot in the arm.
The cornerstone of the 5-year expansion program was a consolidation of the flying training programs at one location.
The Air Corps Training Center was established at San Antonio under the command of Frank Lahm. It included not only primary and advanced flying schools, but also the School of Aviation Medicine.
The location and design of this new airfield was entrusted to one of the military men who flew with the Wrights at College Park in 1909. General Frank Lahm, holder of the first military pilot's license. In 1911, Lahm had flown with Falloy at Fort Sam Houston. His first choice for the new airfield? San Antonio, Texas.
There were an awful lot of cities around the country that believed they should be the location. San Antonians initially thought that because we had Kelly and because we had Brooks and because we had this long relationship with the Army, that we didn't have to worry about this, the new base was going to come to us. And then a congressman who headed that committee came to town in the middle of 1927 and told us that if we didn't show an interest, and furthermore, if we didn't provide free land for the new base was not coming to town, and furthermore, Kelly was likely to close and go elsewhere as well. We had this very wonderful moment where nobody believed the congressman. So Tuttle organized with Clegg what was called the San Antonio Aviation Corporation in September of 1927. Well, by December, they'd raised $100,000, and the cost of the land was $500,000. So Tuttle then decided he better ask the city for help, and this is now early December, and they've got like 3 weeks left.
So here it was in a really, really short period of time that they had to wind up buying this land. And in this building, in my granddad's office, is where 4 men got together and signed notes for like $574,000. It'd be like right now if I signed a note for somewhere between $8 and $9 million, but all those men would have lost everything they had. Of course, the city passed a bond issue that paid back my grandfather and the other people.
In the end, they just barely made it. And literally, I think it was December the 29th, when they finally got all this final financial stuff worked out and all the landowners agreed to do it, and they could notify the congressman that they had the land and the city was going to be able to offer to the military for free.
Brooks prepared to move its primary training and School of Aviation Medicine to the new base as they moved forward with aviation innovation. Brooks led the way with early paratroop experiments, and Carl Crane began work on one of the first flight simulators.
So Randolph Field was designed to be the ideal air city. You can see from the architecture, from the layout of the base, that this is unlike any other Air Force base, certainly any other military installation in the whole world, probably.
What makes Randolph, in my mind, so distinctive, especially in San Antonio, is the unique circular layout of the field itself, which incorporates some of the more attractive aspects of both the city planning and the Garden City architectural designs, plus the dedicated use of the Spanish colonial revival architecture throughout the base.
And so Randolph is the Mecca, it's the ideal, it's the whole glamour of being a pilot.
Of course, the most visible and well-known building on Randolph is the base administration building, otherwise known as the Taj Mahal because of its stately appearance. And the Taj is really an ingenious blend of architectural grace and military utility. And it was Lieutenant Clark that sketched the original design for the Taj Mahal. And what Clark wanted to do was to hide the unattractive water tower that was a looming presence over most military airfields at the time. And so the idea he came up with was to combine a large administration building and enclose that around a 500,000 gallon water tank, which by the way is still a source of water for the base today. The team of Atlee and Robert Ayers was selected to take Clark's original design and then to develop that into a final design for the Taj Mahal.
And that's where our wing headquarters is located, and some of our other wing functions. It really is a beautiful building, a great architecture, and the sort of centerpiece of the whole base.
Except for the Panama Canal, Randolph was the largest building project ever undertaken by the Army. Nearly half the buildings were completed by June 10, 1931, when the dedication ceremony took place. It concluded with 250 planes flying overhead in close formation. Local newspapers claimed this air armada was the largest assembly of aircraft that had ever been mustered at one time. A few months later, the majority of the buildings were finished just in time for the arrival of the first cadets.
The governor of Texas, Governor Moody, came to dedicate Randolph Field. He said, "It is my feeling that the future of America depends on the success of this airfield."
Aviation is hot, and pilots want to be pilots. Young boys are dreaming of becoming pilots. And to do that in the Army, you have to come to Randolph.
I think a lot of times people think that being a pilot is special, but it's not really being a pilot that's special. It's what pilots get to do that's special. And that opportunity to fly, I think, has captured imaginations and challenged people to take the flight and to take the high ground and to fly above the earth.
Remember, people didn't even have airplanes to start with. But once you started this little scale of going from earth to planes and eventually to rockets and rockets to the moon, you are freeing man from gravity.
People were still captivated by the thought of aviation, and young men were clamoring to get into service, and young ladies were clamoring to meet the young men who got into the service. And Hollywood came down the big way. The first movie that came out of here was called West Point of the Air. It did put San Antonio on the map in the eyes of Hollywood, and this led to other movies. I Wanted Wings came here. Apparently the premiere of these movies always presented great social opportunities, again, to tell the story of military aviation and San Antonio.
In the 1930s, times were tough, and people flocked to movies to escape. Movie premieres were welcome events in a city engulfed by the Great Depression.
The Depression everywhere was terrible, but it was particularly terrible in poor towns like San Antonio. Thousands of people, not only out of jobs, but with no hope of work.
The country was in the grips of a mighty economic depression. But in spite of this, the incomparable Jimmy Doolittle, a reserve major at this time, set a new world speed record for land planes. Outside the service, a scientist named Robert Goddard made the first flight of a rocket. So aviation was progressing, and the speed, altitude, and distance frontiers were being pushed farther back.
Stinson continued to be the city's airport when airlines started coming in. 1928, what was eventually turned into American Airlines started with passenger and airmail service. By 1935, we had 3 airlines, and we built our current terminal, which was a WPA project.
The governor of Texas, he said, you know, I'm paraphrasing here, but the essence was that the men who would learn to fly at Randolph Field would be the ones who would then defend the United States in this war that was clearly getting ready to start.
On December 7, 1941, the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor. The attack destroyed 5 battleships, 1 mine layer, and 3 destroyers. Of the 188 American aircraft in Hawaii, almost all were destroyed or damaged. There were more than 4,000 American casualties. The nation was at war.
The American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
The war had started. We were ill prepared. So we got ready. We got ready in a big way.
Randolph in World War II was very much a different place. In addition, whereas in the first years you might have classes of only 100 students, it was not unusual to have classes of 400 and 500 students during World War II. In 1943, the basic flying training program was moved from Randolph, and we started training instructor pilots, which is the primary mission of the base today.
Brooks was a major training facility at the time.
Lackland Air Force Base, which started as the San Antonio Aviation Cadet Center in 1941. And our base came from Brigadier General Frank Lackland. He realized that we needed a new area for indoctrination of air cadets. And then it turned into Lackland Field in his honor in 1947.
Early in World War II, Kelly was primarily a training base. They had so many people to train that they had to expand their training facilities. Well, Kelly had certain advantages, though, that it could be used for maintenance. Kelly gradually and then very abruptly became a maintenance facility rather than a training facility.
But World War II is off the charts in terms of its impact on the city. And so the cultural life in San Antonio is very much revolved around the military. Down at the various hotels, there were the Army clubs, and they were having their cotillions. In the various social lives, it was amazing.
And clearly the city embraced the cadets out here. It was a short train ride or car ride from Randolph Field, which is basically an all-male community. And so the young men, when they finally get to go into town, have a great time. And the Gunter Hotel sets up a lounge area, a special club for cadets. And it's here that the young cadets meet with the young women of San Antonio.
The social thing to do was to be an aviation or a flying cadet, as they were called in those days, and be immersed into San Antonio society. And the young ladies of San Antonio, I think, shared this enthusiasm for it. So much so that even in World War I and certainly on into World War II, the number of military and civilian marriages just were remarkable.
I think in the beginning, San Antonio was referred to as the mother-in-law of the Army.
One important impact was economic. A town which had been suffering from no jobs suddenly had many jobs.
When Pearl Harbor occurred in December of 1941, there were 890 civilian defense workers on Kelly Air Force Base. 1 year later, in December of 42, there were 20,000. Randolph was hiring, Lackland was hiring, Brooks was undergoing a surge in growth.
With many young men serving in the military service, women were recruited into the workforce. In San Antonio, these working women were called Kelly Cadies.
The war had started, and they were hiring at Kelly. And so I went, hoping that I would get in, and I did. There was so many people there working there, all ages, men and women. Everybody was hard worker, and everybody was had somebody in the war, so that's why they were working there too. There I learned how to pack the parachutes for the military man to jump. It was an awesome work because you know that somebody depended on you. It was just a very big experience for me.
You listen to people talk about that period of time, and it was so dynamic, in large part because the population was growing rapidly.
Some of the great cultural revolutions that come out of World War II touch Randolph. And so the 78th Aviation Squadron, composed of African Americans, was stationed at Randolph Field. During World War II, a large contingent, 500 squadron detachment of women come to the base, and they do such things as air traffic control, which is a revolutionary job for women. We also had women Air Force service pilots, the famous WASP.
I had just finished test flying this P-40 based at Randolph Field, San Antonio. The WASP at 125 national bases flew 77 different types of military aircraft. Trainers, transports, pursuits, known as fighters today, and bombers, including the B-29. We instructed, flew reconnaissance, did engineering tests, and towed targets. We flew every type of mission there was, except for combat. When you get the aviation bug, it's different from anything you've ever experienced. Ask any pilot, they'll tell you that same story. It's the love of flying. That was our common bond. And everybody was doing something for the war effort.
August 15, 1945. After more than 400,000 American deaths, after 3 years, 8 months, and 8 days of war effort by the entire nation, World War II ended in victory and jubilant celebration.
You'd have to recognize, I think, that World War II was the pinnacle of military aviation. It had more importance during that war. It played a larger role in winning that war than it ever had before.
World War II spurred new ways of thinking about the airplane. Brooks would soon become an important center for training flight nurses, technicians, and flight surgeons for air evacuation in the 50s and early 60s.
When World War II was over, and the world knew it had been won by a united military effort that included the largest, most powerful air force in history, I wondered what would happen next. Would we let our military organization disintegrate as we had done after World War I? Would we let our machines of war be turned into junk and cut our military strength back to a skeleton force?
The plug was pulled, and people were leaving the service in great numbers. So these gentlemen left, the airplanes were scrapped, they were turned into little 10-pound ingots of aluminum, smeltered, thrown away, sold to foreign countries, whatever it was, to reduce this vast armada of airplanes, reduce this vast group of soldiers, pilots, maintenance people, navigators, whoever. They're gone to civilian life.
Not only were there surplus airplanes, there were surplus airfields. Land that the city had purchased for a new airport had been diverted to military use. Now it could become a new municipal airport for San Antonio.
Most communities, when airports were first developed, the airports were out in the country. And San Antonio is no different. When this airport was developed back in the 40s, it was on the north side of town, and there wasn't housing development or other development around it. Most people, think of airports as air service, as passenger traffic, but San Antonio International, another key part of that and the economic engine that it is, are jobs associated with other aviation-related businesses. And a good example of that is San Antonio Aerospace, which is the former Dee Howard company, and they employ a little over 1,000 people.
Well, Dee Howard's a legend in aviation. Dee is a genius. He certified 3 aircraft, brand new, in a 10-year period, which is an amazing feat.
Then after World War II, he worked as an aviation mechanic, and he was at Stinson Field. And then they built the San Antonio International Airport was built. And in about 1947, 46 or 47, Dee started his own company. And his first 2 employees were a young man by the name of Ed Swearingen and another young man by the name of Bill Lear Jr., who was the son of Bill Lear, who later developed the Learjet. Dee always had an entrepreneurial spirit. He was always a brilliant mechanic and a great aerospace engineer. And he had the idea to take World War II Ventura bombers and convert them to corporate aircraft.
In San Antonio, new developments in civil aviation were matched by new developments in military aviation.
The Cold War erupted. And so although the military spent about $1 billion in San Antonio during World War II, in the Cold War, it was up to $7 billion a year. That money poured into those bases and then trickled out into this community in ways that we had never experienced before. That kind of wealth, that kind of possibility over a 40-year period meant that this city took off like a skyrocket. We had a larger population, its wealth was increasing, and most of all on the west side and the east side, you had African Americans, whites, and browns, Hispanics, who had a chance to get up into the middle class, a chance they had never had before this war happened and before this military spending came in.
People at first, I think, thought Sputnik 1 was just a gimmick. People weren't that excited about it. That was in October the 4th, 1957. I might point out that the ground was broken at Brooks Air Force Base in May 1957, just months before Sputnik 1. When the second Sputnik 2 went up and you had a dog on board and you could hear the dog barking, this is no longer a beach ball going up, it was a satellite with a living subject inside of it. So the upshot of this was that the project came to the School of Aviation Medicine, as it was still called at that time, at the very time that we moved to Brooks. In fact, the Air Force had their own project going, which people didn't know about. It was called Dinosaur. The Air Force was very close to being able to put a plane in space that would be taken and dropped out of underneath the wing of the airplane, and it would go into orbit and then could fly back to Earth. That was the Dinosaur project. The pilots that we were going to be using for those were all test pilots. And they were chosen because they had been testing planes that could go faster and higher and were used to all of these kind of stresses.
By this time, the jet had come into play in a big way, giving the Air Force a Mach 1 capability of flying faster than sound and being able to get to enemy targets before enemy were able to get to our targets here. It was coming on at the end of World War II, but in the Cold War, the jet aircraft came into its full importance. Randolph Field played a major role in this.
When I started the T-38 training, that's where I really fell in love with the flying portion. It was a fast jet. It could do anything and everything. We're going 300 knots at 500 feet, you know, it's just so much fun that when I finished pilot training, I went ahead and applied to be an instructor. And being in the top 10% of my class, I was selected to be the first T-38 female instructor in Del Rio, Texas. So I came to Randolph Air Force Base and I took my pilot instructor training course.
Well, here at Randolph, we've been in the flying training business for over 75 years. The mission has advanced significantly, obviously, just because of the technology.
After World War II, the mission of the base changed fairly significantly. We had B-29 crew training program during the Korean War. It was one of the central missions here.
They really brought bombers, B-29s, into places like Kelly to refurbish them and put them into first-class shape so they could be used in Korea. So that was when Kelly really became an important facet for aircraft maintenance.
Our first big test, really big test for the young Air Force and for the enlisted corps, came in Korea, came during the Korean War. We were set up to handle no more than about 20, maybe 30,000 people as far as permanent party people. By the middle of 1951, however, we had more than 84,000 people on this base. There was no way we could handle them all. And it was a very strenuous time for Lackland, but a very important time for growth of the United States Air Force.
In 1946, Dr. Theodore von Karman gave the Air Force its start in the space and jet age with his famous study, New Horizons. His forecast proved unerringly accurate throughout the 50s and 60s.
The New Horizons study had been commissioned by visionary Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces. The report successfully predicted many future technologies, including supersonic aircraft, satellite communications, atomic energy, and aviation medicine.
Most of the top people in the Air Force at the end of World War II, they were pilots rather than scientists. And the Air Force needed to build up a capability of people who were scientifically oriented. This was all in keeping with von Karman's thoughts. They developed then various facilities to apply the type of scientific background to their problems. Brooks was one of them.
The idea was that we needed an aerospace medical center to handle the problems of high flight and all the things that would be done to support a pilot in flight. And so that was when the idea of building such a center was done at Brooks. But what we needed was people who could be evaluated for doing things in a unique environment, like pulling G-forces and exposed to high altitude with low oxygen levels, and all of those kinds of things that were important in aviation. Brooks became headquarters for the Air Force's new Aerospace Medical Center. President John F. Kennedy came to San Antonio to dedicate the new facilities.
I've come to Texas today to salute an outstanding group of pioneers. The man who manned the Brooks Air Force Base School of Aerospace Medicine and the Aerospace Medical Center. It is fitting that San Antonio should be the site of this center and this school as we gather to dedicate this complex of buildings. For this city has long been the home of the pioneers in the air.
The next day, a wave of shock and grief swept the nation. President Kennedy had been shot. And the official last address of President Kennedy was here in San Antonio, and it was on the space program right here at Brooks. And one of the things that Kennedy used to say about the space program was it wasn't so much going to the moon that was important as it was being able to get there. And what that means, it was an engine for the development of science and technology that was stimulated by the space program itself. Whenever we're involved in a great struggle for anything, that you stimulate progress in all areas. That includes even war.
Space studies progressed through the 1960s, and these developments also provided new technology for warfare. In 1961, the Aerospace Medical Division helped develop aircraft gunships and improved body armor for the conflict in Southeast Asia. Brooks became vital in developing air evacuation equipment and procedures.
Well, many of the Vietnam-era helicopter pilots who were flying medevac units opened up the whole medevac notion in San Antonio so that you can fly helicopters into the hill country and bring patients into the city, fly it into deep South Texas and bring them back to the medical centers here. And so there's been this churning of personnel, income, and most of all the technology that the military's helped to invent that thus gets reinvested in the community.
Vietnam also escalated the demands on Kelly. In 1964, the air material areas worked 24 hours a day to support operations in the Pacific. Supply personnel, maintenance teams, engine mechanics, and volunteers were all sent overseas. In 1973, Kelly served as a welcome reception site for 11 flights in Operation Homecoming, the return of prisoners of war who had been held captive in North Vietnam.
The Missing Man Monument was dedicated to the Freedom Flyers, who were the prisoners of war in Vietnam, who came back to the United States, and when they came back, they were requalified to fly here at Randolph Air Force Base back in the early 70s. And the Missing Man Monument is really a monument dedicated to those who couldn't come back. And it's a forced ship with the missing man in the Missing Man formation that flies out to signify that one member who didn't come back.
I think there's a great sense of pride. If you travel around San Antonio, we would say we were Military City, USA. And what we attracted and maintained here for a number of years was basically the Air Force Depot for the C-5, later C-5A. It employed many, many San Antonians, allowing many families to enter what we refer to as the middle class. We have generations now whose parents worked at Kelly Field from the 60s and 70s and such. As a result of the military presence, enabled them to provide for their children to go to college. So this is an incredible story.
One of the things that happens, of course, is that after World War II, and especially after Southeast Asian conflict, there's a whole series of base closures and consolidations.
In 1995, Brooks was under scrutiny. Kelly Air Force Base closed instead.
The thought that Kelly could close, I think, to be honest, had never been taken seriously in San Antonio for many years.
In San Antonio, it was almost as if it was the death of a family member. It loomed that large.
It took a massive effort in the community to really plan what to do. And really it's a wonderful story about what has happened there.
It required a special executive order of the president, but instead of closing the base very quickly in 1 to 2 years, which is the normal course of business for the Air Force, they were given 5 years to close it. That was significant because it allowed the local authority time to bring in new companies. So the loss of jobs was mitigated. Fortunately, in that closure, we were given the right to jointly use the airfield with the Air Force, and we do that today, the airfield being one of the greatest assets.
nose gear touchdown.
The airfield itself allows us to land anything that flies today. That's unique in the United States.
The base closures and realignments changed the infrastructure of San Antonio Air Force facilities. Unique partnerships with private businesses emerged from the changes. Kelly became Port San Antonio, and Brooks became Brooks City Base.
Here at Gore Design Completions, we design, engineer, fabricate, and install custom aircraft interiors. Mostly flying palaces, flying sculptures. They're all one-of-a-kind, handmade. They're all different.
Many of them are head of state aircraft owned by presidents and head of countries. And you know, you have a little more privacy out at Kelly. It was painful, you know, for a lot of people when Kelly closed. But I think the variety of businesses that are out here is actually better because there's more jobs.
Yeah, and it's higher paying jobs too. With all the aerospace business in San Antonio and the Air Force and so forth, you get a lot of very qualified people in avionics and electrical and also maintenance. And since we've occupied the hangar here, our payroll has more than tripled, so it's a great economic generator.
San Antonio is really a mecca for aircraft interior completions. And so because of that industry being here for several decades, San Antonio really has a plethora of craftsmen that do that kind of high-end work.
There's a lot of talented people in this town. You know, aviation is thriving in San Antonio.
And Kelly's a great place for us to be.
I think that San Antonio has a great future in aviation.
San Antonio has been really the aviation center of Texas, and in many ways has been the aviation center for the whole United States. Everybody that's been anything in aviation who's flown out of here or learned to fly here throughout the whole United States, it's like a who's who.
Well, I think the opportunity to fly and the privilege to fly is the same today as it was 100 years ago. And I think that the same things that drew people into flying back in the early 1900s are the same things that are drawing people into fly now. But we're just using different equipment.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
As I look back over the more than 6 decades since the airplane was born, I see that the aeronautical sciences have come a long way. I'm impressed with the fact that at each step along the way, many people thought that we had reached the pinnacle of our technical capabilities. How wrong they were. First came the jet era, then the ICBM era. These were followed by Sputnik and our magnificent space program. My thoughts go back to those wonderful days at San Antonio, when every flight was a first and nearly every landing was a crash. While there have always been those who said there were definite limits to how far, how fast, and how high man could go, it seemed as if there was always someone around to exceed those limits. But those of us who had flown since the beginning saw no limits. We thought man would go as high, fast, and far as he dared, and that the only limitation was man's imagination.
There's an aviation saying known to many. It speaks for Benjamin Falloy and all those who followed him into the air. To most people, the sky is the limit. To those who love aviation, the sky is home.
Flying, take me up in the air. Where or when we go, it matters not, I don't care. Pull me up into the blue. I wanna get a bird's eye view. Flying, let's go flying in an aeroplane. Rushing through the valley over fields of grain. Flying, won't you take me flying today?
Flying, take me up in the air. Where or when we go, it
is astounding.
Feel my heart is really pounding.
Wrap a scarf around my neck and strap me in. Take me to an altitude that I've never been.
Flying, won't you take me flying today?
In this very town, you know, the barnstormers put on a heck of a show. People came from miles and miles around.
Wings Over the Alamo is made possible by Lockheed Martin. And the City of San Antonio, the San Antonio Convention and Visitors Bureau, Film SA, the San Antonio Airport System, and Port San Antonio, the United States Air Force, Air Education and Training Command, Boeing, and Pratt & Whitney.